my American colleagues here are constantly following the news with holding their breath. It's not the end of the world, of course, we need to continue the struggle, but in the case of Morocco, the strength comes from very progressive legal framework, which is important. A strong constitution, legislative reforms which have ironed out many of the gender discriminatory provisions. This is a big advantage for a country. But another point that you made, and I think it fits very much with the core-level analysis that I suggested at the beginning, is the situation of the oppositional groups. That seems to be a major breakthrough in the Moroccan political culture, which allowed for more democratic openings. Having said that, we also remember the Iranian revolution, where many progressive oppositional groups were part of the revolution, but unfortunately got co-opted. So there's always a challenge, but we must recognize that oppositional groups need to be there at the table. The important issue is that one oppositional group does not co-opt the process and wipes out everything else. So I think these are very, very interesting issues, and we can learn much from the Moroccan example. So let's move to this part of the world where we are, and I'd like to give the floor to Jacqueline and hear about the Brazilian experience. Jacqueline.
Thank you. Since Portuguese is not still a language around the world, I'm speaking in English. Thank you, Yakin. After hearing all the wonderful presentations of my friends, we're going to make this turn to Latin America. On a common base of discussion of transition, I would like to center my presentation basically on the title itself of this workshop, which is Transition to Democracy, and have us thinking a little bit of transition as a very dynamic moment of opportunities for change. And because transition is an opportunity for change, and change here is taken in a neutral sense, can be change for better or for worse, it is key to define the principles and the mechanisms that will consolidate the democracy to come, as the political, civic, economic, and social institutions are being set in place, which is happening in many countries now in the MENA region. So what I want to stress is that depending on the characteristics of this transitional moment, of the dynamics of this transition, we will have different faces of democracy, or even not democracy at all, as we understand it. And so this is a crucial momentum of power. This is a crucial momentum where you have the battles for the hegemony of the shaping of the concept of democracy that is about to come. It's a battle for the hegemony of the shaping, of the claiming of the legitimacy to speak and to represent. Who represents who? Who speaks for who? And what is the most legitimate discourse in that particular society? This is a key power struggle that different societies that have gone through democratic transitional periods are either experiencing or have experienced in different moments of our history, be it in Latin America, be it in other parts of the world. Because there is a moment which we could call revolution, for in the sense of maybe founding of another order, that you build huge coalitions. everybody comes together. Everybody's together, you know? And the Tahrir Plaza is maybe the picture of that, but everybody's together either in clandestine meetings, in organizations, with one basic slogan: people united against dictatorship. And this is a very necessary strategic front, the huge front, the large front. And we have experienced this in Latin America. We have experienced this in Brazil, when we have struggled against a dictatorship, military dictatorship in that case, that ruled the country for decades. And then the moment of transition was the moment where people united against dictatorship were taking the corridors and the public plazas. And who is people? What does this concept of people mean? For strategic reasons, people means a united, massive, and uniform figure that has no sex, no social class, no race or ethnicity, no sexual orientation. People is the big, massive front that is united against what you would call the hard nucleus of dictatorship, the violation of the state, the constant violation of the state in terms of human rights. But what is key is to be alert that this moment of euphoria, this moment of political participation is very dangerous for certain groups that give a shape and that distinguish the concept of people, among them women. So what I wanted to turn to is this need to, in this process of democratic transition, transit, to have clear that people encompasses different groups of citizens that have different power and different legitimacy in that society. And that is a moment where they have to group themselves. Not to become on an identity kind of politics, but to bring to what you would call the concept itself of democracy, the idea that diversity is a central axis, structurizing principle of democracy, not a marginal conception. And I think that sometimes we are not really aware of the need of these battles within the common front. Within the common front, yes, we are all struggling to have free elections. And this is a main, as the Minister of Foreign Relations of Peru mentioned, this is a main component of democracy, the source of power. So if the source of power is democratic, is through elections, this is a main component of democracy. But let's not forget that Hitler was elected. So I think that we have always to be aware that yes, the source of power is very important. Elections are very important. But elections in themselves do not respond for a democratic process nor a democratic transition to process. And so in the case of Brazil, it's similar to some other countries in the South Cone of Latin America, we have had these large fronts struggling against the military regime. But at the same time, and now I refer particularly to the case of Brazil, but not exclusively, already we had other social forces in the public arena that were saying democracy also means equality. Equality in family laws, it means equality in the labor market, it means a non-racist society, it means a society that respects diversity, etc., etc. And as when we talk politics, we talk about power, there's no other language. it's just power. The fact that these groups were able to build not only women's coalition, but to bring these issues into other movements that at that time were emerging in the country as very important social forces as the labor unions. Just remember that that's where Lula comes from. It's from this emergency of the labor movement in the public arena. And that's where feminists and women's groups started to work with. Starting to work inside labor unions. Starting to make alliances with the women's commissions in huge labor unions so that they would have their agenda. Working with professional associations of women, working with professional associations of men and women, like lawyers' bars, working with rural women, domestic workers. I mean, bringing our agenda of equality to the broader political spectrum of the so-called people that more and more became diverse in itself and much more complex. So when in 1985 we had the first civilian president, women had already a demand to have a public organ, kind of a ministry, to enhance public policies from the federal government, because Brazil is a federative republic. And that was key. Why? Because that was the constitutional. And a number of our colleagues here have mentioned constitutions. This is a key moment. It's the constitutional process that will set the normative basis for that kind of democracy that is about to come. And if the basis for democracy are not based on equality, universality, and starting from the axis and the matrix of human rights and citizenship rights, and from there building to state responsibility, and not the other way around, it's very difficult that we will have a democracy that is really democratic. And so I will just very quickly turn into one of the major claims that women were making in Brazil. And again, to reinforce that women's rights are rights that have to do with civil law, are rights that have to do with labor legislation, with social benefits, with property, with access to justice. It's everything that has to do with the functioning of a society and of a government. It's not a ghetto. We are not on a ghetto. We are talking about the central issues of social justice, of democracy. And so, and even of foreign policy also. So this was very, very important to have the network with all these other groups. It was through these networks that we were able to work for 5 years, systematically. Receiving, there was no email at that time, receiving the demands of different groups of women from all over that huge country, putting them together, working with the jurists that worked pro bono with us, separating what was absurd from what was feasible, and then starting an advocacy progress with the new constitutional Congress, a daily advocacy work, and we sent more than 100 amendments, substitutivas, etc. And this constitution that came out in 1988 assured full equality between men and women in the family, in the labor market, in terms of access to land property, but also advanced in terms of certain specific rights that are needed to make us equal, and that we might call affirmative rights, such as maternal leave, maternal paid leave, and assured the right to have access to reproductive choices in life, and also the duty of the protection by the state in cases of family violence, which will then set the parameters for very important changes that came later in civil law, in penal code, and etc., etc. So I don't want to go into details, and I will be glad to discuss afterwards, but I just wanted to say, if it wasn't for us refusing to become this concept of people with not specific features nor demands nor claiming rights, I don't think we would have in Brazil now this legal parameter from where to start, because democracy is never concluded, we all know that. Democracy is a process. And now looking at what is happening in the MENA region, we see how much this region is specific, how much it's different, and how much it's similar. Particularly today, with an increase of conservative Christianity in my country and affecting more and more what we call political religion. And so the need